They shoved
Do
her
not
into a
fear, my
vampire
love.
king's
This is our
fortress
eternal
wearing a
bond.
stolen
But at
wedding
what
dress,
cost? I feel the
betting she'd be
darkness.
dead
A
within the
price
hour.
worth paying.
Her stepsister called her the bastard worthless, damaged, not fit to breathe the same air. But Damien Corvus, the 400-year-old lord who'd seen empires rise and fall, looked at her scarred, work-worn hands and said 5 words that shattered everything you've survived. That takes power. In exactly 7 days, she went from scrubbing stone floors on her knees to signing treaties that kings couldn't negotiate. When her stepmother and stepsister crawled back, demanding to reclaim their rightful wealth, the reckoning was public, brutal, and absolutely deserved. This is Isolde Raven, the girl they threw away and the queen who made them pay. But let's start at the beginning, before the crown, before the power, before the vampire lord who would burn the world down for her. Let's start in the place where survival was the only currency that mattered, and Isolde had been paying that price her entire life. The clock in Thornwick Manor's kitchen struck 4:30 in the morning. The sound echoed through the stone corridors like a death knell. Isolde Raven was already on her knees. The scrub brush bit into her palms. The lye soap burned where the skin had cracked open days ago, wounds that never got the chance to heal before she was back on the floor, back on her knees, back in the position that had defined her existence for 21 years. The water in the wooden bucket had gone gray an hour ago. It smelled of mildew and desperation. Her hands moved in mechanical circles. Scrub, rinse, scrub, rinse. The flagstones of Thornwick's kitchen were older than memory itself, worn smooth by centuries of servants' labor. Isolde sometimes wondered how much of that smoothness came from hands like hers. Hands that bled, hands that shook from exhaustion, hands that would never be soft, never be clean, never be enough. Outside the narrow kitchen window, the October moon hung fat and orange in the pre-dawn sky. Isolde didn't look at it. She'd learned years ago not to look at beautiful things. Beautiful things reminded you that beauty existed somewhere else for someone else in a world you would never touch. The kitchen door slammed open. Isolde didn't flinch. Flinching was a luxury. Flinching meant you expected something different. Mrs. Hadley, the head cook, stood in the doorway. Her face was already red veins standing out against her neck. She'd been drinking. She was always drinking. "Girl." Mrs. Hadley's voice cut through the silence like a blade through butter. "Lady Constance wants the silver polished by 6. All of it. The drawing room candelabras, the dining settings, the serving platters. Every single piece." Isolde's hand stilled on the brush. The silver polish took 3 hours minimum. It was 4:30 now. The math was simple. The math was impossible. "Yes, ma'am." Her voice came out steady. That was important. Constance liked fear, but she liked resistance even less. The trick was to sound like compliance, to wear obedience like armor, until they got bored and moved on to someone else. Except there was no one else. There was only Isolde. Mrs. Hadley grunted and disappeared back up the servants' stairs. The door swung shut. Isolde was alone again. She stood up. Her knees screamed in protest. 21 years old and her body already felt ancient. That's what happened when you started scrubbing floors at 6 years old, when you carried water buckets that weighed more than you did, when you slept 4 hours a night in a closet that didn't have a window. Isolde dumped the dirty water into the stone sink. The bucket was heavy. Her arms shook. She ignored them. Weakness was a sin in Thornwick Manor, and she'd been paying penance for the sin of existing her entire life. The silver was kept in the butler's pantry, locked behind glass doors that reflected Isolde's face back at her. She paused, just for a second, just long enough to see what everyone else saw. Dark hair that hadn't been properly washed in weeks, would pulled back in a braid that was more practical than pretty. A face too thin, cheekbones sharp enough to cut. Eyes the color of smoke, ringed with shadows that no amount of sleep would fix. And there on her left cheekbone, the scar, 3 inches long, courtesy of Vivian's riding crop when Isolde was 14 and had dared to wear a ribbon in her hair. "You're not pretty enough to decorate yourself, bastard." Vivian's voice echoed across 7 years like it was yesterday. The ribbon had been blue. Isolde never wore blue again. She turned away from her reflection and opened the cabinet. The silver gleamed in the pre-dawn light, mocking her with its beauty. Each piece was worth more than Isolde would earn in a lifetime of servitude. Each piece would be handled with more care than she had ever received. Her fingers found the polish in the soft cloths. The work was meditative in its repetition. Rub the paste onto the tarnished metal. Watch it turn black as it absorbed decades of neglect. Buff it away until the shine returned. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Her mind drifted as her hands worked. It always did during these hours, the dangerous hours, the hours between night and dawn when thoughts crept in like thieves. She thought about her mother, Marianne Raven. That's what Isolde called her in her head, even though Marianne had never been allowed to use the Raven name while she lived. Lord Edmund Raven had loved Marianne, everyone said so. He'd loved her more than his cold, ambitious wife Constance. He'd loved her enough to promise legitimization for their daughter. But promises written on deathbed air dissolve faster than morning mist. Marianne had died the night Isolde was born. Childbirth complications, they said. Quick, merciful, nothing to be done. Isolde had believed that for 20 years. Then 6 months ago, she'd been cleaning out the old physician's office after Dr. Moreland finally died at the age of 97. She'd found the letters, hidden, sealed, addressed to authorities that no longer existed. The letters that explained how Lady Constance had insisted on administering the birthing medicines herself, how she'd tripled the dose of ergot that should have stopped the bleeding, how Marianne had died screaming while Constance stood in the corner watching, waiting. Isolde had burned those letters, not out of fear, not out of loyalty, but because knowing changed nothing. Dead was dead, justice was a fairy tale, and fairy tales didn't come true for bastards born to dead mothers and absent fathers. The candelabra in her hands gleamed like starlight. Isolde set it down and reached for the next piece. Upstairs, she heard footsteps. Light. Quick, Vivian was awake. That was unusual. Vivian rarely woke before noon. The girl worshipped beauty sleep the way priests worship jazz, but these footsteps weren't languid. They were frantic. They were scared. Isolde's hands slowed on the silver serving platter. Something was wrong. The footsteps multiplied. Constance now. Heavier. Angrier. Then the voices started, muffled by floors and walls but rising in pitch, rising in panic. Isolde set down the cloth. She shouldn't care. She should finish the silver. She should keep her head down, her eyes, down her entire existence, down where it belonged. But curiosity was a weed that grew in the darkest soil, and Isolde's life had been nothing but darkness. She crept to the servants' staircase. The wooden steps were old, knew every footfall could betray her with a single creak. But Isolde had learned their language years ago. She knew which edges to step on, which shadows to hide in. The voices were coming from the west wing, Vivian's chambers, the pristine velvet-draped sanctuary that Isolde was only allowed to enter with a bucket and a mop. She reached the landing. The door was cracked open. Golden lamplight spilled through painting stripes across the dark hallway floor. Isolde pressed herself against the wall and looked. Vivian was on the floor. 24 years old, beautiful in the way that money and privilege allowed you to be beautiful. Golden hair that had never known lye soap. Skin that had never seen hard labor. A face that had launched a dozen marriage proposals from sons of lesser lords who wanted to climb the social ladder. But right now, that face was twisted in terror. She was surrounded by fabric. Mountains of it. French lace, Italian silk. Tulle that cost more per yard than most families earned in a month. Wedding fabrics. Constance stood over her daughter. Lady Constance Raven, 48 years old and sharp as a blade that had been honed on other people's suffering. Her face was pale. Her hands, usually so composed, were shaking. You have to go, Constance's voice was steel-wrapped in velvet. The contract was signed before you were born. If a Raven daughter does not present herself at Blackstone Keep by midnight, the pact is broken. Let it break, Vivian's scream could have shattered crystal. Let them come here. Let them burn the house. I won't marry a corpse. I won't let that monster touch me with his dead hands. Isolde's breath caught. Blackstone Keep, the vampire lord, the tithe. She'd heard the stories. Everyone had. 200 years ago, when the Raven family was nothing but dirt farmers struggling to hold worthless northern land, they'd made a pact. Protection from the vampire lord who ruled the territories in exchange for tribute. Crops, livestock, and every third generation a bride. The last bride had been Isolde's great-great-aunt. She'd gone to Blackstone Keep in 1824. She'd never come back. The contract specifies for a Raven daughter, Constance was saying. Her voice had dropped to that dangerous whisper that meant someone was about to bleed. You are the only legitimate Raven daughter. You will go. I won't. Vivian threw a hairbrush across the room. It smashed into the vanity mirror, cracking the glass. 7 years bad luck. Isolde almost laughed, as if Vivian had ever known a bad day in her life. I'm beautiful. I have a future. Lord Ashford's son wants to marry me. I could be a lady, a real lady, not some vampire's meal. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Constance turned slowly. Her eyes swept the room. The wedding fabrics, the broken mirror, her sobbing, useless daughter. And then those eyes found the crack in the door. Found Isolde. "Come in, girl." It wasn't a request. Isolde's hands clenched at her sides. She could run, down the servants' stairs, out the kitchen door, into the woods. She could disappear. But where would she go? She had no money, no family, no skills beyond scrubbing and surviving. And winter was coming. Winter in the north killed quickly. She stepped into the room. Vivian looked up, her face blotchy with tears and rage twisted into something uglier. "Oh, perfect. Here comes the bastard to watch my life end." Constance ignored her daughter. She was staring at Isolde with an expression that made ice form in Isolde's stomach. It was the look of a woman solving a problem. It was the look of a woman who had just found a tool she could use. "Come here." Isolde moved forward. One step. Two. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough to obey, far enough to run if she needed to. Constance circled her slowly, assessing, calculating. Her manicured nails tapped against her chin. "She has the eyes," Constance murmured. "Edmund's eyes. The Raven eyes." Isolde's spine went rigid. "My lady, the contract specifies a legitimate heir." "The contract," Constance interrupted her, voice silk over steel, "specifies a daughter of Raven blood. It says nothing about legitimacy. Damien Corvus hasn't been seen in public for 50 years. He doesn't know what Vivian looks like. He only knows the blood signature." The room tilted. Isolde's lungs forgot how to work. "No," the word escaped before she could stop it. Constance's eyes narrowed. "No. I'm a bastard. Everyone knows I'm a bastard. The vampire lord will know." "The vampire lord," Constance said, stepping so close Isolde could smell her perfume, expensive and cloying, "will smell Raven blood. That's all the magic cares about. That's all he cares about." Vivian had stopped crying. She was staring at Isolde with something that looked like hope, that looked like salvation bought with someone else's life. "Mother," Vivian breathed. "Mother, you're brilliant." Isolde backed toward the door. "I won't. You can't make me." Constance moved faster than Isolde had ever seen her move. Her hand locked around Isolde's wrist. The grip was iron, the nails dug in hard enough to draw blood. "You will," Constance whispered, her face inches from Isolde's. "You will go to Blackstone Keep. You will present yourself as Vivian Raven. You will sign the contract. And if you refuse, if you run, if you breathe one word of this deception to anyone, I will make sure every servant in this house knows you tried to sabotage your sister's future. I will tell them you're a thief, a liar, a whore like your mother." Isolde's free hand curled into a fist. She wanted to hit her. God, she wanted to hit her. 21 years of swallowed rage, swallowed tears, swallowed screams were rising in her throat like bile. But Constance wasn't finished. And then the lady continued her smile, a beautiful, terrible thing. "I will make sure you never work again. Not in this county, not in the neighboring counties. I will spread your name like poison until there's nowhere left for you to hide. You'll starve in a ditch, girl. Alone, unmourned, forgotten." The fight drained out of Isolde like water through cupped hands. Because Constance could do it. Constance had the power, the connections, the casual cruelty required to destroy someone who had nothing. "Look at it this way," Vivian said from the floor, her voice bright with relief. "At least you'll die useful for once." Isolde's eyes burned. She would not cry. She had not cried in front of them in 15 years. She would not start now. "How long do I have?" Her voice came out flat, dead. Constance released her wrist. "With hours. The carriage leaves at sunset." They scrubbed her in the bathing chamber like they were trying to erase her existence and replace it with someone worthy of the name she'd never been allowed to claim. 3 maids attacked her with brushes that felt like weapons. They scoured away the dirt, the calluses, the evidence of her life. The water turned gray, then brown, then black. They dumped it and filled the copper tub again. And again. The soap smelled of lavender and roses. Expensive. The kind of soap Vivian bathed in daily. On Isolde's skin, it felt like a lie. "Head back," one of the maids ordered. Isolde tilted her head. They poured water over her hair, working some kind of perfumed oil through the tangles. Her scalp ached. She said nothing. When they finally pulled her from the tub, her skin was red and raw. They didn't give her time to dry. They pushed her toward the vanity, sat her down, and began the transformation. Powder to hide the shadows under her eyes. Rouge to give color to her hollow cheeks. kohl to line her lashes. They painted her face like an artist preparing a canvas, except the final product wasn't meant to be beautiful. It was meant to be passable. It was meant to be good enough to fool a monster in the dark. The dress came next. It was Vivian's wedding gown, custom-made, imported from Paris. Ivory silk that cost more than Isolde would earn in 10 lifetimes. The bodice was structured with whalebone designed to cinch a willing waist into an hourglass. Isolde's waist didn't want to cinch. Tighter, Constance ordered from the doorway. The maid pulled the corset laces. Isolde's ribs screamed. Black spots danced in her vision. I can't breathe. Tighter. Another pull. Another inch. Isolde's lungs were trapped in a cage of silk and bone. Her hands gripped the vanity edge hard enough to turn her knuckles white. When they finally tied off the laces, she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the girl staring back. The dress fit barely. The neckline was high, hiding her collarbones, hiding the sharp angles of malnourishment. The sleeves were long, hiding the scars on her forearms from hot pots and sharp corners. The skirt was full, cascading to the floor in waves of expensive fabric that whispered when she moved. They'd done something to her hair. Pinned it up in a style that looked elegant, looked refined, looked like something a lady would wear to her wedding. But the eyes gave her away. The smoke-gray eyes that held too much knowledge, too much pain, too much survival. Constance stepped forward. She held a veil in her hands, heavy lace thick enough to obscure. This will help, she said, and draped it over Isolde's face. The world went soft and blurry. Isolde could see shapes, shadows, but no details. It was like being buried alive in expensive fabric. Perfect, Constance declared. Now listen to me very carefully. Isolde stood still. She was good at standing still. You do not speak unless spoken to. You keep your head down. You keep that veil on. When the vampire asks your name, you say Vivian Raven. When he asks you to sign the contract, you sign. Once the marriage is ratified, the debt is cleared. What happens after? Constance shrugged. After is not my concern. Isolde's voice came from somewhere far away. And if he kills me, then at least you'll die a Raven. The words landed like stones in still water. Ripples of impact, circles of meaning. You'll die a Raven, not as Raven, not with the Raven name, but wearing it, borrowing it, a costume for a corpse. Vivian appeared in the doorway. She'd changed into a morning dress, pale pink, cheerful. She looked like a girl who'd just been given a reprieve from execution. She looked like someone who'd bought her freedom with her sister's life and felt nothing but relief. Here, Vivian said, holding out a bouquet. Blood-red roses, thorns still attached. The stems were wrapped in white ribbon, but the thorns poked through. Isolde took the bouquet. One of the thorns bit into her palm. She felt the sting, felt the warm trickle of blood. Good, she thought. Let him smell the blood first. Let him know exactly what he's getting. Not a princess, not a prize. Just a girl who's been bleeding her whole life. The clock struck 6. Time to go, Constance said. The carriage was black lacquered wood with iron fixtures that looked like claws. It sat in Thornwick's circular drive like a hearse waiting for its passenger. The horses were black too. Their eyes reflected the dying sunlight in a way that didn't look natural. The driver was hunched on his seat, face hidden beneath a hood. He didn't speak. He didn't move except to breathe, and even that seemed optional. Constance walked Isolde to the carriage door. Her hand on Isolde's elbow was performative. A concerned stepmother sending her daughter off to marriage. Anyone watching from the house would see affection. Isolde felt the nails digging into her arm. Remember, Constance whispered. Head down, veil on, sign the contract. Die a Raven. She pushed Isolde toward the carriage steps. Isolde climbed in. The interior smelled of old leather and something else. Something sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in a vase. The door slammed shut. No goodbye. No good luck. Just the metallic click of the latch and the sudden, suffocating darkness. Isolde was alone. She sank onto the velvet bench. The corset made sitting torture. She couldn't take a full breath, couldn't expand her lungs, couldn't scream even if she wanted to. The carriage lurched forward. Through the lace veil, she watched Thornwick Manor recede into the distance, the house where she'd been born, the house where her mother had died, the house where she'd spent 21 years being invisible. She would never see it again. That thought should have brought sadness. It brought nothing. Numbness was a mercy. The roses in her lap bled thorns into her palms. She welcomed the pain. Pain meant she was still alive, still here, still herself, even if she was wearing someone else's name. The journey stretched into hours. The carriage rattled over cobblestones that felt like bones, ancient and unforgiving. Outside the small window, the landscape changed. Rolling hills gave way to dense forest. The trees grew closer together, their branches reaching across the road like skeletal fingers trying to hold back travelers. The whispering woods. Even Thornwick's servants wouldn't enter these woods after dark. They said the trees remembered things, old things, violent things. Isolde pressed her face to the window. Through the veil, she could make out shapes moving between the trunks. Too large to be deer, too quick to be human. The wolves that patrolled Damien Corvus's lands, she realized. The familiars. The creatures that didn't have names because naming them gave them power. One of them paced the carriage for a mile, keeping perfect speed with the horses. Its eyes glowed yellow in the twilight. When it finally peeled away, vanishing into the shadows, Isolde realized she'd been holding her breath. The sun set. The moon rose. Fat and orange and heavy, like it was full of things it wanted to say but couldn't. The carriage crested a hill, and Isolde saw it. Blackstone Keep. It wasn't a house. It wasn't even a castle. It was a fortress carved from the cliffside itself, black stone jutting out of the earth like a broken tooth. 7 towers pierced the sky. Gas lamps flickered in windows that looked like eyes. The ocean churned beyond it, waves crashing against rocks, with a sound like thunder. Like rage, like the world ending over and over again. This was where she was going to die. The carriage rolled to a stop at the base of massive iron gates. They were 30 feet high, covered in symbols Isolde didn't recognize. Wards, protection, warnings. The gates opened, not because someone pulled them, not because of any mechanism Isolde could see. They just opened, groaning like something in pain, revealing a courtyard paved in black stone, so polished it reflected the moon like dark water. The carriage continued forward. The gates swung shut behind them. The sound of metal meeting metal was final as a coffin lid. They stopped again. The driver didn't open the door. He simply knocked twice on the roof, a signal, a warning, and then the carriage jerked forward, speeding away the moment Isolde's feet touched the ground. She stood alone in the courtyard. The dress whispered around her ankles. The veil obscured her vision. The roses in her hand were bleeding her slowly, thorn by thorn. The front doors of Blackstone Keep were oak and iron, old enough to have seen centuries. They opened now, not with a creak, but with a whisper. As if the house itself was breathing her in. Isolde took a step forward, then another. Her legs shook. The corset made breathing almost impossible. She focused on putting one foot in front of the other. That was all she could control. One step, one breath, one moment at a time. She crossed the threshold into darkness. The doors closed behind her. The sound echoed through what had to be an enormous space, but Isolde couldn't see it. The veil and the darkness combined to make the world nothing but shapes and shadows. She stood in what her footsteps told her was a grand hall. The floor was marble polished to mirror brightness. She could hear her own breathing magnified by the space, could hear her heartbeat, could hear nothing else. Then a voice, it came from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the stone walls like the building itself was speaking. Vivian Raven. The name hung in the air. Wrong, a lie wearing her sister's identity. Isolde's hands clenched around the rose stems. Blood ran hot between her fingers. You are late. Isolde dipped into a curtsy. Her knees shook so badly she almost collapsed. The roads were treacherous, my lord. Silence. Long enough that Isolde wondered if she'd already failed some invisible test. Rise. She stood. The corset dug into her ribs. The veil clung to her face with humidity and fear. Footsteps now. Slow, deliberate. Coming from the grand staircase she could barely make out through the lace. A figure emerged from the shadows. Isolde kept her eyes down, focused on the knot of a silk tie. But even that small glimpse told her everything the stories had gotten wrong. Damien Corvus was not a corpse. He was not a creature of rot and death. He was a man, or something that looked enough like a man to make the difference terrifying. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit cut from fabric so fine it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His hands, visible at his sides, were gloved in black leather. He moved like smoke. One moment at the base of the stairs, the next standing 2 feet in front of her. Isolde's breath caught. Even through the veil, she could feel him studying her. His presence was cold, but not the cold of death. The cold of deep water. Ancient, patient, waiting. Look at me. A command, not a request. Isolde lifted her chin. Through the heavy lace, she could make out his face. Pale, sharp cheekbones. A mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. and eyes gray but not like smoke, like silver, like mercury, old and intelligent and utterly completely inhuman. He tilted his head, studying her. Then he did something that made Isolde's blood turn to ice. He inhaled, deeply, deliberately. His nostrils flared, his eyes narrowed. French lavender, he murmured. Rose oil, imported silk. He paused, and beneath all that expensive perfume, something far more honest. He stepped closer, too close. The cold radiating from him made goosebumps rise on Isolde's arms. Lye soap, he continued, his voice soft as a blade through silk. Floor wax, wood smoke, the scent of a woman who scrubs on her knees. Isolde's heart hammered against her crushed ribs. He knew, oh God, he knew. Before she could step back, his hand moved, faster than sight. He caught her left wrist, gentle but inescapable. With his other hand, he stripped the lace glove from her fingers in one smooth motion. Isolde gasped. Her hand, exposed in the lamplight, told the truth her dress tried to hide. The palm was calloused rough from years of holding scrub brushes and carrying buckets. The nails were short, torn. There was a burn scar on her thumb from a kitchen stove. The cuts from the rose thorns wept fresh blood. These were not the hands of a lady. These were the hands of a servant. Damien held her hand up between them, examining it like a scholar examining a rare text. His thumb traced the calluses, the scars, the evidence of a life spent in service. Then he looked at her face. Really looked as if he could see through the veil, through the powder, through the 21 years of survival to the truth underneath. A slow smile spread across his face. It didn't reach his eyes. It was the smile of a predator who'd just been insulted. Tell me, he whispered, his voice dropping to something that vibrated in Isolde's chest. Where is she? Isolde's voice cracked. I am Vivian Raven. I enjoy gardening. That is why my hands do not lie to me in my own house. The last word shook the windows. The lamps flickered. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Before Isolde could react, he had her against the wall. Not violently, but absolutely. His hand was at her throat, not squeezing, just resting there. A reminder of how easy it would be. I can hear your heart, little bird, he hissed, his face inches from hers. It's beating like a trapped hummingbird. Vivienne Raven is a spoiled narcissist who has never done a day's work in her life. You, he pressed slightly, forcing her to meet his eyes through the veil. You are something else entirely. His other hand reached up and tore the veil away. Isolde squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the bite, waiting for the pain, waiting for death. Please, she whispered. My family. The debt. The debt, Damien said, pulling back just enough to look at her fully, was for a bride. They sent me a sacrifice thinking I wouldn't know the difference. They insulted me. He released her. Isolde slid down the wall, her legs no longer capable of holding her weight. The marble was cold against her palms. Damien turned his back on her and, I will kill them all, he stated, calm as commenting on the weather. Tonight, I will drain your father's house until the foundation crumbles. No! Isolde scrambled to her feet, grabbed his arm. It was like grabbing iron wrapped in ice. But she held on. No, please take me. I'm here. I have the blood. I am a Raven. My father was Lord Edmund Raven. Damien stopped. He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then at her face. A bastard. Does it matter? Isolde cried, tears finally breaking free, running hot down her cheeks. The contract says a daughter of the bloodline. I am a daughter. I am here. I am willing. He turned to face her fully. The rage in his eyes had banked down to something colder. More dangerous. Curiosity. You are willing, he asked quietly. You know what I am. You know what this life means. You would shackle yourself to a monster to save the people who treated you like dirt. His eyes narrowed. I can smell the truth on you, girl. They made you a maid in your own father's house. They dressed you in your sister's wedding gown and sent you here to die in her place. And still you beg for their lives. Isolde's throat was raw. They're all I have. The words tasted like ash, like lies. But what else could she say? The truth was too complicated. The truth was that she didn't want to save them. She wanted to watch them burn. But she also didn't want to be responsible for murder. Didn't want that weight on her soul. Maybe she was just too used to being sacrificed to know how to stop it. Damien studied her for a long, agonizing moment. Somewhere in the keep, a clock struck midnight. The deadline. His expression shifted. Not softer, but different. Like he'd made a decision that surprised even him. Very well. He walked to a massive oak table near the fireplace. A parchment waited there, yellowed with age. Next to it, an inkwell that looked suspiciously dark. Not ink, blood. He picked up the quill, dipped it, and signed his name with a flourish that spoke of centuries of practice. Then he turned, holding the quill out to her. "Sign," he commanded. "But know this girl whose name isn't Vivian. I know you're a bastard. I know you're a substitute. I know everything they thought they could hide. Once you sign this contract, you belong to this estate. You belong to me. There is no going back to scrubbing floors. There is no going back to sunlight and servitude. Sign and you step into a world you cannot comprehend." Isolde walked to the table. Her hand trembled as she took the quill. It was warm. The blood ink steamed slightly. She looked at the parchment, saw Damien's signature in flowing script, saw the empty line waiting for hers. Beneath the line it said, "Name of bride." Isolde hesitated. Vivienne Raven would be the smart choice, the safe choice, the lie that kept everyone protected. But something in her rebelled. Something that had been crushed and beaten in silence for 21 years suddenly screamed loud enough to be heard. If she was going to die tonight, she'd die as herself. She wrote Isolde Raven. For the first time in her life, she claimed her father's name. Not borrowed, on. The moment the ink dried, the parchment burst into blue flame. Not hot, not destructive, just light consuming the contract until nothing remained but ash and the binding magic it represented. Isolde stared at her hand. The cut from the rose thorn had stopped bleeding. The skin was knitting together before her eyes, leaving only a thin white line. "What?" Damien was suddenly behind her. She hadn't heard him move. His hands settled on her shoulders, heavy and possessive. "Welcome home, Isolde Raven," he whispered into her ear. "My wife." His grip tightened slightly. Not painful, just present, just claiming. "Now take off that ridiculous dress. You look like a funeral arrangement." The suite they gave Isolde was larger than the entire servants' quarters at Thornwick Manor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the cliffs. Beyond the glass, the ocean churned black and silver under the moon waves, throwing themselves against ancient rocks with a sound like distant artillery. The bed was draped in midnight velvet. The furniture was carved from wood so dark it seemed to absorb light. A fireplace tall enough to stand in roared with flames that cast dancing shadows across walls hung with tapestries depicting battles Isolde didn't recognize. But what made her hands shake, what made her throat close up with something that felt dangerously like tears was the bookshelf. An entire wall of books, leather-bound, gold-embossed, ancient and new and everything in between. More books than Isolde had seen in her entire life. More knowledge than she'd ever been allowed to touch. At Thornwick, she'd stolen reading lessons from Vivian's discarded primers. She'd memorized poetry from newspapers, lining trash bins. She'd built a cathedral of learning from scraps and secrets, always afraid someone would notice, would take even that small rebellion away. Here the books waited like an invitation, like permission. Isolde reached out, fingers trembling, and pulled a volume from the shelf. The leather was soft as skin beneath her touch. She opened it carefully, reverently. The pages smelled of wine and ink and possibilities. "You can read." She spun around. Damien stood in the doorway she hadn't heard open. He'd removed his jacket. The white shirt beneath was rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms that looked carved from marble. He wasn't wearing the gloves anymore. His hands were pale, long-fingered, almost delicate, except for the way they held absolute stillness. Isolde clutched the book to her chest. "I taught myself. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have touched." "Why are you apologizing?" He stepped into the room. The door closed behind him, silent as a secret. "These are yours now. Everything in this room is yours." She stared at him, trying to reconcile the monster from the stories with the man who'd just given her a library, with the creature who'd called her his wife and then left her alone to explore rooms that had no locks. "I don't understand." "That much is evident." He moved to the fireplace, poured 2 glasses of something amber from a crystal decanter. He held one out to her. "You're not a prisoner here, Isolde. You signed a contract, yes. You belong to this estate to me. But belonging doesn't mean caged." She took the glass. Their fingers didn't touch. She was grateful for that small mercy. "Then what does it mean?" "That remains to be seen." He settled into one of the high-backed chairs near the fire. The flames cast his face in sharp relief, all angles and shadows. He looked tired, she realized. Not physically, he probably didn't get physically tired. But there was something in his eyes. A weariness that came from watching centuries pass while you stayed the same. Isolde remained standing. The whiskey in her glass caught the firelight, glowing like captured sunset. She didn't drink it. She didn't trust it. The dress is in your wardrobe, Damien said, gesturing to a door she hadn't explored yet. Several dresses, actually. Lucian took the liberty of estimating your measurements. If anything doesn't fit, tell him. He'll adjust. Lucian, my steward, you'll meet him tomorrow. Damien took a sip from his glass. He's been managing this estate for 200 years. He knows everything worth knowing and several things that should have stayed buried. You'll like him. He has opinions. Isolde's fingers tightened on the book still pressed against her chest. And what should I do? What do you expect from me? The question hung between them. Heavy. Dangerous. Damien set his glass down on the side table. The crystal made no sound against the wood. I expect you to survive, Isolde. That seems to be what you're good at. He stood. Isolde tensed, but he didn't move toward her. He moved toward the door. Get some rest. Tomorrow you learn what it means to be Lady of Blackstone Keep. He was almost to the threshold when Isolde's voice stopped him. Why didn't you kill me? He paused, didn't turn around. Because the world has enough corpses, and not nearly enough survivors. The door closed. Isolde was alone. She sank into the chair he'd vacated. It was still warm, still held the impression of his weight, his presence. She set the book down carefully on the table and finally allowed herself to drink the whiskey. It burned all the way down, tasted like smoke and peat and something older than memory. Isolde closed her eyes and let the fire warm her bones. For the first time in 21 years, she fell asleep without being afraid of what morning would bring. Morning came anyway. Isolde woke to sunlight streaming through windows she'd forgotten to cover. The ocean beyond was a different creature in daylight, still wild, still dangerous, but painted in shades of blue and silver instead of nightmare black. Someone had been in her room while she slept. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she noticed the tray on the bedside table. Fresh bread still warm, butter in a porcelain dish, jam that looked like crushed rubies, tea steaming in a cup so delicate she was afraid to touch it. A note rested beside the tray. The handwriting was precise, elegant. Good morning, Lady Isolde. I am Lucian. We'll meet at 10 o'clock in the library. Eat. You'll need your strength. Isolde ate. The bread was soft as clouds, nothing like the stale crust she'd survived on at Thornwick. The jam tasted of summer and sweetness. The tea was perfectly steeped, fragrant with bergamot. She ate slowly, carefully, like someone who'd learned the hard way that food could be taken away if you seemed too eager, too greedy, too human. The wardrobe held dresses in deep jewel tones, emerald, sapphire, amethyst, no pastels, no whites, nothing that screamed innocence or delicacy. These were dresses for a woman who meant to be taken seriously. Isolde chose the sapphire. The fabric was heavy silk, well-made but not ostentatious. It fit perfectly, no corset required. She could breathe, she could move, she could fight if she needed to. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the reflection. Clean, fed, dressed like she mattered. The girl staring back looked dangerous. Good. The library was 3 floors of books connected by spiral staircases of wrought iron. Sunlight poured through skylights, illuminating dust motes that danced like snow. The air smelled of leather and paper and the particular magic of accumulated knowledge. Isolde stood in the doorway, overwhelmed. Magnificent, isn't it? She turned. The man standing beside her was old, or at least he'd been old when he stopped aging. His face was lined with the ghost of wrinkles that would never deepen. His hair was silver white, pulled back in a queue that belonged to a different century. He wore a waistcoat embroidered with symbols that hurt to look at directly. His eyes were kind, ancient and tired but kind. Lucian, Isolde said. Lady Isolde. He bowed, actually bowed like she was someone worth bowing to. Welcome to Blackstone Keep. I apologize for not greeting you last night, but Lord Corvus thought you'd had enough vampires for one evening. You're 520 years old, yes, though I stopped counting after the 1st century. The numbers become meaningless after a while. He gestured toward the center of the library where a massive oak desk sat buried under papers, ledgers, maps. Shall we? Isolde followed him. Her footsteps echoed on the marble floor. Everything here echoed. The keep was built for sound, for space, for loneliness. Lucian settled into the chair behind the desk with a sigh that seemed to carry centuries. He gestured to the chaos in front of him. This, he said, is our current crisis. Our accountant, Mr. Pembroke, was poisoned 3 days ago. He'll survive vampire constitution, you understand, but he won't be functional for another week. Unfortunately, the fiscal reports for 7 provinces are due to the Council in 4 days. These reports determine taxation resource allocation, dispute arbitration. If they're late or incorrect, we face penalties that would bankrupt smaller territories. Isolde looked at the mountain of paperwork. Ledgers in different languages, maps marked with symbols she didn't understand, numbers that made her head spin. I don't see how I can help with this. Lucian's smile was small but genuine. Lord Corvus seems to think you can. He mentioned something about Thornwick's ledgers. Heat rose in Isolde's cheeks. I kept the household books. It wasn't official. Lady Constance took credit for the work, but someone had to actually do the math, and she couldn't be bothered. But that was one house. She gestured helplessly at the papers. This is 7 provinces. It's numbers, Lucian said simply. Big numbers, small numbers, but still just numbers. And Lord Corvus says you have a gift. What gift? He didn't specify. He simply said, let her treat it. Lucian stood gathering his coat. I have other duties. You have 4 days. If you need anything, pull that cord. He pointed to a velvet rope near the window. Someone will come. He was halfway to the door when Isolde found her voice. Wait, you're just leaving me with all of this. You don't even know if I can. Can't be worse than the mess it's already in. Lucian's eyes twinkled with something that might have been mischief. Besides, Lord Corvus has been alone a very long time. If he thinks you're worth the gamble, that's good enough for me. The door closed. Isolde was alone with 7 provinces worth of financial chaos. She stood there for 5 full minutes just staring. Then, because she didn't know what else to do, she sat down and picked up the first ledger. The numbers swam. Different currencies, different taxation systems, different languages, making different promises about trade routes and tariff agreements. But underneath the chaos, there were patterns. Isolde had learned young that patterns were how you survived. You watched, you memorized, you understood the rhythm of a household so well that you knew when Lady Constance would demand tea, when Vivian would throw a tantrum, when the cook was drunk enough to leave the kitchen unattended so you could steal food. This was the same skill, just applied to numbers instead of people. She pulled a fresh sheet of paper toward her and began to write. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky. Isolde didn't notice. She was lost in the numbers, in the beautiful logic of accounting. Each province had its quirks, its loopholes, its petty corruptions. But once you saw the pattern, once you understood how the pieces fit together, it was like solving a puzzle. A puzzle she'd been solving her entire life. By the time the sun set, painting the library in shades of gold and amber, Isolde had organized the first province's records. She'd found 3 accounting errors that had been compounding for years. She'd discovered a tariff loophole that was costing the estate thousands in lost revenue. She'd restructured the trade agreements to be more favorable to both the vampires and the human settlements they protected. The door opened. She didn't look up. She was too focused on the numbers in front of her, too deep in the pattern to surface. Isolde? Damien's voice pulled her back to reality. She blinked, her eyes burning from hours of reading by candlelight. When had it gotten dark? When had the candles been lit? He stood in the doorway, still wearing the same clothes from last night. His expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes were sharp, assessing. Lucian said you were still here. It's past midnight. Isolde looked at the clock on the mantel. He was right. She'd been working for 14 hours straight. I didn't realize. She started to stand. Her body protested. Her back ached. Her eyes burned. Her fingers were stained with ink. Damien moved faster than sight. One moment at the door, the next standing beside her, his hand on her shoulder, keeping her seated. Show me what you've done. She showed him the reorganized ledgers, the corrected errors, the new trade structure that would increase revenue by 20% while actually lowering taxation on the human settlements. He read in silence. His hand on her shoulder was the only point of contact, the only reminder that he was there. It was warm. She hadn't expected that, hadn't expected a vampire to carry heat. Finally, he spoke. You did this in 1 day. I started with Province 1. The others will go faster now that I understand the system. I should have everything ready in 3 days. Isolde. He turned her chair so she was facing him, knelt down so they were eye level. Do you understand what you've just done? Pembroke has been our accountant for 80 years. He's brilliant with numbers, and you just solved problems he's been struggling with for decades. She shook her head. It's just patterns. Once you see how the pieces fit, most people can't see the patterns. Most people look at this and see chaos. His eyes searched hers. How? I remember things. The admission felt dangerous, like revealing a weapon she'd been hiding. Everything. I read a page, I remember it. I hear a conversation, I remember it. Every number, every word, every... She stopped. I thought everyone could do that. Until I realized Vivian couldn't remember what she'd said 5 minutes ago. Then I knew it was different. I knew I had to hide it. Why hide it? Because different means dangerous. Different means they notice you, and being noticed when you're supposed to be invisible is how you get hurt. Damien was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something that made Isolde's breath catch. He took her ink-stained hand in both of his. You are not invisible here, he said softly. You are not a servant. You are my wife. You are the lady of this keep. And that mine, his thumb traced the edge of her palm. That brilliant analytical mind is exactly what this territory has needed for 300 years. Isolde's throat closed. You don't even know me. I know you survived 21 years in a house that wanted you dead. I know you saved people who treated you like dirt. I know you walked into a vampire's fortress, expecting to stay, and instead demanded to live. His smile was small, dangerous. I know enough. He stood still, holding her hand, pulling her to her feet. Now come. You need to eat. You need to sleep. The numbers will still be here tomorrow. But that's an order, Lady Isolde. She should have bristled at the command, should have pulled away. But there was something in his voice. Not cruelty, not control, concern. When was the last time someone had been concerned about her? She let him lead her from the library, her hand still caught in his. Dinner was served in a smaller room this time. Not the endless table from the stories. This was intimate, a table for two near windows that showed the moon rising over the ocean. Isolde sat across from Damien, close enough to see the silver flecks in his gray eyes, close enough to notice the way candlelight softened the harsh angles of his face. Roasted duck, glazed carrots, fresh bread with honey butter, food that tasted like care. Damien's goblet held the same dark liquid, but tonight he didn't just drink. He spoke. Tell me about your mother. Isolde's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Why, because she made you, and I want to understand what kind of woman raises a daughter brave enough to sign her own name instead of hiding behind a lie. Isolde set down her fork. Marianne died the night I was born. I never knew her. Just stories. What stories? That she was kind, that my father loved her more than he loved anything, that Constance hated her for it. Isolde's voice dropped. That she didn't die in childbirth, that Constance poisoned her. Damien's hand tightened on his goblet. You know this for certain. I found the physician's letters, 6 months ago, hidden for 20 years. She looked at him. I burned them, because knowing didn't change anything. Dead is still dead. But now it's not just knowing. Now you can act. Can I? Isolde laughed bitter. I'm a bastard with a vampire husband. What power do I have? More than you think. He stood, walked around the table, offered his hand. Come with me. He led her deeper into the keep, down the spiral staircases that descended into the earth itself. The air grew cooler, damper. The stone walls glistened with condensation that caught the lamplight like scattered diamonds. They emerged into a library, but not like the one upstairs. This one was older, rawer. The books here were ancient, bound in materials Isolde couldn't identify. Some were chained to the shelves. Others glowed with faint light that pulsed like a heartbeat. This is my work, Damien said, gesturing to a desk covered in maps and charts. I manage the regional economy. I track historical bloodlines to prevent inbreeding in the human settlements. I protect this territory from things that make vampires look tame. Isolde moved to the maps on the wall. One showed the Northern Territory's 7 provinces marked in different colors. Another showed something else. Symbols, wards, lines of power that crisscrossed the landscape like a spider's web. What are these protection grids? 200 years ago, your ancestors agreed to guard the Northern Pass. That's why I pay the tithe, why I honor the contract. The Ravenets were supposed to patrol the borders, maintain the wards, keep the corrupted from breaking through. The corrupted, Damien's face darkened. Vampires who've lost their humanity. We all walk a line, Isolde. Immortality requires balance. Feeding without killing. Power without tyranny. Most of us manage. Some don't. Those who fail become corrupted. Feral. They kill for sport, for pleasure. They're everything the stories say we are. He pointed to the red line on the map. This is the Northern Pass, the weakest point in our defenses. For 2 centuries, the Ravens maintained the wards. Then your father grew weak. Your stepmother grew greedy. They stopped patrolling. They spent the tithe money on parties and silk dresses. His finger traced the red line. And now the corrupted are gathering, testing the wards, looking for weaknesses. Isolde stared at the map, at the evidence of her family's failure rendered in ink and symbols. Why didn't you punish them? Why didn't you demand they fulfill their contract? Because I was tired, Damien said simply. Tired of forcing humans to keep promises their great-grandparents made. Tired of playing shepherd to sheep who resent being protected. I thought if I demanded a bride, at least I'd have someone here. Someone to talk to. Someone who understood duty. He laughed bitter and dry. Thought I was getting a spoiled brat who I'd have to terrify into obedience. Instead, I got you. Isolde turned to face him. What do you need me to do? The protection wards are failing. They're keyed to Raven blood. I can't renew them. Only you can. How about a drop of blood at each ward stone, 7 stones, 7 days' journey through dangerous territory. His eyes held hers. And there's something else you should know. The council is questioning my choice. 5 vampire lords who think I've dishonored our traditions by accepting a bastard bride. They're demanding proof that you're worthy, that this marriage is legitimate. And if I can't provide proof, then they dissolve the marriage, strip you of protection, take you back to Thornwick. His jaw clenched. And I lose territorial rights. 300 years of work gone. Isolde's mind raced through the implications. When do they arrive? 2 days. Then we have 2 days to make me worthy. She stepped closer to him. Teach me everything I need to know. Damien looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled. A real smile, not the predatory thing from that first night. It made him look younger, almost human. Your mind works like a cartographer mapping unknown territory, he said softly. Seeing connections others miss. Finding solutions in chaos. I'm a survivor, Isolde corrected. There's a difference. No, Damien said. There isn't. The next day passed in intensive learning. Lucian taught her etiquette, how to address vampire lords, which gestures were respectful and which were deadly insults. The politics of immortal creatures who remembered slights from centuries ago. Damien taught her history, the treaties, the wars, the delicate balance between vampire and human that kept both species alive. And in between, Isolde worked on the ledgers. By evening, she'd organized 5 provinces. The patterns were clearer now. The solutions obvious once you understood the underlying structure. That night, Damien found her in the library again. She'd spread maps across the desk, cross-referencing patrol routes with ward locations. You should rest, he said. I'm fine. Isolde, she looked up. He was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. He'd stopped wearing his jacket around her. The shirt sleeves rolled up revealed forearms marked with scars that shouldn't exist on immortal skin. Evidence of battles fought. Survived. I'm scared, she admitted. These vampire lords, what if they see what Constance saw? What if they look at me and only see a bastard who doesn't belong? Damien crossed the room in 3 strides, took her hands in his. Then they're fools, and fools don't survive long in our world. That's not comforting. It's not meant to be comforting, it's meant to be true. He pulled her to her feet. Dance with me. What? Dance. If you're going to face the council, you need to look like you belong at my side. That means knowing the waltz. Damien, I don't, but he was already moving her into position, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. The library had no music, but he hummed something low and old, a melody that sounded like it came from a time before recorded sound. He moved. She stumbled. His hand at her waist steadied her. Follow my lead. Trust the rhythm. They moved through the library between shelves of ancient books under lamplight that made everything feel like a dream. Isolde stepped on his feet 3 times. He didn't complain, just adjusted, corrected, guided. Better, he murmured. You're thinking too much. Stop analyzing. Just feel. She tried to let go of the constant calculating, the survival instinct that kept her 2 steps ahead of every disaster. Tried to just move. And slowly and possibly, she found the rhythm. They waltzed through the library like they'd done this 1,000 times, like they were made to move together. His hand on her waist burned even through the fabric of her dress. His eyes never left hers. The humming stopped. The dance slowed. They stood in the center of the room, still holding each other, both breathing hard for reasons that had nothing to do with exertion. You learn fast when you trust yourself, Damien said. His voice was rough. I'm motivated. By fear. By the desire not to disappoint you. Something shifted in his expression. Isolde, You could never disappoint me. Before she could respond, before she could think of something to say that wouldn't reveal how much his words affected her, a scream tore through the keep. Damien's entire body went rigid. That came from the East Wing. They ran. The East Wing housed the servant quarters, mostly human staff who managed the daylight hours when vampires slept. Isolde had met a few of them, kind faces, gentle hands, people who treated her like a lady instead of a mistake. The screaming was coming from the nursery. Damien hit the door hard enough to shatter the lock. The room beyond was chaos. A woman, the nurse Mary, stood in front of a crib, a fireplace poker clutched in her shaking hands. Her white uniform was splattered with blood. In the corner, crouched and hissing, was a vampire. But not like Damien, not like Lucien. This thing was wrong. Its spine was twisted. Its fingers had grown into claws. Its eyes were solid black, no intelligence behind them. Just hunger, just rage, corrupted. It lunged for the crib, for the baby inside. Isolde didn't think, didn't plan. She grabbed the silver candlestick from the hallway table and threw herself between the monster and the child. The corrupted hit her like a freight train. They went down hard, Isolde's back slamming into the floor. The candlestick skittered away. Claws raked toward her throat. She rolled, grabbed the creature's wrist. It was impossibly strong, pushing down claws, inching toward her jugular. Then Damien was there. He grabbed the corrupted by the back of its skull and threw it across the room. It hit the wall hard enough to crack stone. Damien moved like violence itself. He was on the creature before it could recover, his hand wrapped around its throat. No hesitation, no mercy. One twist. The crack echoed. The corrupted went limp. Silence. Damien stood over the corpse, breathing hard. When he turned to Isolde, his eyes were black, completely black. The veins beneath his skin stood out dark against pale flesh. His fangs were fully extended. This was the monster from the stories. This was what he really was. Isolde should have been terrified. Instead, she crawled to the crib, checked the baby, a little girl maybe 6 months old, crying but unharmed. Isolde picked her up, held her close, whispered comfort into her soft hair. You're safe, I've got you. Mary sobbed. It came through the window. I tried to stop it, but I couldn't. You did perfect, Isolde said firmly. You protected her. You're a hero. She looked up at Damien. His eyes were still black. His hands were shaking. He was staring at her like he'd never seen her before. Why did you do that? His voice was raw. You could have died. She's a baby. Isolde rocked the child gently. What was I supposed to do? Let it kill her. You were supposed to run. You were supposed to let me handle it. You weren't here yet. Isolde. He took a step forward, stopped. His eyes were changing back to gray, but slowly, like it took effort. Do you understand what you just did? You put yourself between a corrupted vampire and its prey. You fought it. His voice cracked. You protected a servant's child, a child that means nothing to you. She's not nothing. Isolde stood still, holding the baby. No child is nothing. Damien stared at her. The black finally receded completely from his eyes. He looked human again. Almost. In 300 years, he said quietly, I have never seen someone risk their life for a stranger's child. Most humans would have run. Most vampires wouldn't have cared. Most humans weren't raised by monsters, Isolde replied. When no one protects you, you learn to protect everyone else. Because no one deserves what I went through. No one deserves to be alone and afraid, while the adults who should keep them safe just watch. The silence that followed was profound. Then Damien crossed the room. He didn't touch her, didn't touch the baby. He just stood close, his presence a wall between her and the rest of the world. You are exactly who this territory needs, he whispered. And I think I'm beginning to understand why survival itself is an act of defiance. Mary took the baby from Isolde's arms, tears streaming down her face, thanking her over and over. Lucien appeared to handle the corpse removal, to manage the servants, to restore order. Damien led Isolde back to her suite. Neither of them spoke, but his hand remained at the small of her back. A point of connection, a promise. At her door he stopped. The council arrives tomorrow. 5 vampire lords who will test you, mock you, try to find weakness. He turned her to face him. Show them what you showed me tonight. Show them what it means to be worthy, not through bloodline, not through legitimacy, but through this. He pressed his hand over her heart, through the strength to stand when you should run, through the courage to protect the powerless, through the choice to be kind in a world that taught you cruelty. Isolde's breath caught. His hand over her heart was warm, Solid. Real. I'm afraid, she whispered. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. He pulled his hand away slowly. Get some sleep, Isolde Raven. Tomorrow you face the wolves. He turned to go. Damien, he stopped. Thank you for not letting me die tonight. Thank you, he replied softly, for proving that some things are worth protecting. The door closed. Isolde leaned against it, her hands shaking, her heart hammering. Tomorrow. The council. The test. She changed into a nightgown, climbed into bed, and dreamed of libraries and silver candlesticks and eyes that turned from gray to black and back again. Somewhere in the dark, she heard her mother's voice. Survive, little bird. Just survive. She would. She had to. Because now there were people counting on her to be more than just a victim. There were people counting on her to be a queen. The council arrived at dawn, but they weren't alone. Isolde woke to the sound of multiple carriages rolling through the gates. She rushed to the window and saw not 5 but 7 vehicles assembled in the courtyard. 5 ornate carriages for the vampire lords, black lacquered wood inlaid with silver that caught the rising sun like trapped lightning. And 2 she recognized, plain, modest, from Thornwick Manor. Her blood turned to ice. Constance and Vivian had come. She dressed in emerald green heavy silk that moved like water, high-necked and long-sleeved. Today called for armor. The silver ring Damien had given her felt heavier than usual on her finger. Lucian appeared at her door, his ancient face grave. They arrived an hour ago, Lady Constance and Miss Vivian, claiming they've come to testify about the fraud committed against the council. Testify? They're arguing you deceived everyone, that the marriage should be void, that Vivian is the rightful bride. Lucian's eyes held hers. Lord Corvus has assembled both trials together. The council will judge your worth and your stepfamily's accusations simultaneously. Isolde's hands went cold. At the same time, he says it's more efficient, everything decided in one day. Lucian stepped closer. My lady, you should know, Lady Constance brought documents, birth certificates, witness statements. She's built a case. Then I'll tear it down. Isolde lifted her chin. Where are they? The Grand Hall. Everyone's waiting. The Grand Hall was vast in daylight. Impossibly high ceilings supported by columns carved to look like trees, their stone branches spreading overhead like a petrified forest. Windows of stained glass painted the floor in pools of crimson and gold and deep violet. The 5 vampire lords stood in a semicircle waiting, but off to the side in chairs that looked like they'd been added hastily sat Constance and Vivian. Constance wore black silk, expensive and severe. Her face was a mask of righteous indignation. Vivian wore pale pink, playing the victim, her eyes red from strategically timed tears. When they saw Isolde, their expressions shifted. Constance's eyes narrowed with calculation. Vivian's mouth fell open in shock. Because Isolde didn't look like a maid anymore. She looked like power. Damien stood near the massive fireplace. He wore black, formal, and severe-looking, every inch the warlord the stories claimed him to be. But when his eyes found Isolde at the top of the stairs, something in his expression shifted, softened. A message meant only for her. You can do this. She descended, one step at a time. Her hand on the banister was the only thing keeping her upright, but she made it look graceful. Made it look like she chose to move slowly, deliberately, like a queen surveying her domain. The lords watched, assessed. Their eyes were different colors, amber black, silver, blood red, ice blue, but they all held the same expression. Curiosity mixed with contempt. She reached the bottom of the stairs, stopped 3 feet from the semicircle, close enough to show courage, far enough to show she wasn't a fool. Gentlemen, she said. Her voice didn't shake. Small mercies. The lord in the center stepped forward. He was tall, reed thin, wearing crimson silk that looked like fresh blood. His face was sharp as broken glass, beautiful in the way that poisonous things were beautiful. I am Lord Marcus Ashford, he said. His voice was cultured, smooth, dangerous. We have gathered to address 2 matters today. First, the question of your legitimacy as Lord Corvus's bride. Second, he gestured to Constance and Vivian, accusations of fraud brought by your family. They are not my family, Isolde said quietly. Constance shot to her feet. How dare you, after everything we've done for you? Sit down, Damien's voice cut through the hall like a whip. You will speak when asked. Not before, Constance sat, but her eyes burned with fury. Marcus continued. Lady Constance claims you deceived Lord Corvus, that you signed the contract under false pretenses, that Miss Vivian Raven is the legitimate bride owed by treaty. And yet I am the one who signed, Isolde replied. I am the one who bled on the wardstones. I am the one Lord Corvus accepted. What does legitimacy matter when the magic itself recognized me? The magic recognizes blood, Marcus countered. Not legitimacy, but a vampire law requires more, which is why we've designed 3 tests: knowledge, bayon, diplomacy, sacrifice. Pass all 3 and your marriage stands. Fail even one. And I return to Thornwick in chains, Isolde finished. I understand. When do we begin? Now. Marcus gestured to the library. But First Lady Constance wishes to present her evidence. Constance stood again, this time with permission. She held a stack of papers. This is Isolde's birth certificate. Mother Marianne Moore, father unknown. She is illegitimate. She has no claim to the Raven name. She deceived Lord Corvus and dishonored the ancient contract. She pulled out another document. And this is a letter from Lord Edmund Raven written days before his death, explicitly stating he did not legitimize his bastard daughter. She is a fraud. The hall went silent. Isolde felt the words like physical blows. She'd never seen that letter before. Never knew it existed. That's a lie, she breathed. Is it? Constance's smile was vicious. Your father knew what you were. He knew you weren't worthy of his name. Why do you think he never made you legitimate while he lived? Because you stopped him, Isolde said, her voice rising. Because you poisoned my mother and threatened anyone who might help me. Prove it, Constance challenged. I will, Isolde said. But first I'll prove my worth. Run your tests. Let's see if bloodlines matter more than capability. Marcus looked between them, then nodded. Very well. The tests proceed. But understand these accusations will be addressed. If you pass the test but the fraud is proven, the marriage is still void. Then let's not waste time, Isolde said. They led her to the library, the upper library where she'd spent 3 days drowning in ledgers and discovering she could breathe underwater. A table had been set up in the center of the room. On it lay a single book, ancient and cracking bound in leather, that looked disturbingly organic. The Treaty of Crimson Dawn, Marcus announced, written in 1247, governs all interaction between vampire territories and human settlements. You have 1 hour to study it. Then you will answer our questions. Every answer must be perfect. One mistake, and you fail. Constance was allowed to watch. She stood in the corner, arms crossed, confident. Isolde sat down, opened the book. The text was dense Latin, 300 pages, 1 hour. Perfect recall. She began to read. Her eyes moved across the page with mechanical precision. Left to right, top to bottom, turn the page, repeat. She didn't take notes, didn't pause. Just read steady and unstoppable as a clock ticking. 15 minutes in, Constance shifted uncomfortably. She's only skimming. She can't possibly... Silence, Damien said from the doorway. You set the trap, let her spring it. At 45 minutes, Isolde closed the book. She'd read every page, absorbed every word. The treaty was now part of her, filed away in the cathedral of memories she'd been building since childhood. She stood, faced the lords. I'm ready. Marcus recovered his composure. Article 7, Clause 12. Recite it. In Latin. Isolde didn't hesitate. The words flowed out of her, perfect pronunciation, perfect cadence. She recited the entire clause, then continued into Clause 13 before Marcus held up a hand. Enough! Article 23, subsection 4. What does it say about border disputes? She told him, word for word, then explained the 3 interpretations that had caused conflict over the centuries and proposed the resolution buried in Article 41 that no one had noticed because it was written in code. Constance's face had gone pale. The lords asked question after question. Obscure clauses, legal loopholes, historical precedents. Isolde answered them all, not just with memorization but with understanding. She saw the patterns, the intent behind the words, the logic that held 7 centuries of law together. Finally, after an hour of interrogation, Marcus stepped back. How? I remember everything I see, Isolde said simply. Everything I hear. It's not magic. It's just how my mind works. The scarred Lord Victor laughed, but it wasn't unkind. Knowledge alone doesn't make you worthy, but it's a start. Second test. They assembled in the throne room. 2 chairs waited at the far end. Damien sat in the higher throne. Isolde remained standing. Victor gestured and servants brought forward 2 men, human, middle-aged, well-dressed. Lord Henry Blackwood and Lord Garrett Thorne, Victor announced, human nobles who control the southern trade routes. They have been feuding for 80 years over tariff rights. Every vampire lord here has tried to negotiate a settlement. All have failed. He turned to Isolde. Resolve their dispute. You have 1 hour. If you fail, their territories go to war. The two lords glared at each other. 8 decades of hatred made manifest. Isolde approached them. Tell me why this matters. Not the legal argument. The human reason. Blackwood bristled. My family has held those routes since 1794. His grandfather tried to steal. I asked why it matters to you, Isolde interrupted gently. Silence. My father died defending those routes, Blackwood said finally. His last words were to protect the family legacy. And without those routes, my settlement starves, Thorne admitted. We're too far north. We need the southern trade. Isolde pulled a map from the table, spread it out. The bottleneck is here. Only one caravan can pass at a time. That's what you're really fighting over. She pointed 10 miles north. What if we built a second bridge here? Blackwood family maintains the southern route. Thorne family develops the northern route. Both feed into the same trade hub. Both profit, both survive. That would require significant investment. Blackwood frowned. Investment offset by increased trade. No more fighting, no more legal fees. Your children inherit prosperity instead of war. The men looked at each other. Decades of hatred didn't dissolve instantly, but something shifted. Who pays for the bridge? Thorne asked. Flip the pod. Vampire territory contributes engineering. You both contribute materials. The bridge becomes a symbol of cooperation. Blackwood extended his hand. Thorne took it. We accept Lady Corvus. The room erupted in applause. Victor stepped forward. 80 years, you resolved it in 20 minutes. I asked the right question, Isolde replied. Why? Not what or how, why? Marcus's voice cut through. 2 tests passed, 1 remains. And this one? His smile was cruel. This one will break you. Sunset came too quickly. They rode out from Blackstone Keep. Damien led. Isolde rode beside him. The 5 vampire lords followed. And behind them in a separate carriage, Constance and Vivian came 2 witnesses to what they hoped would be Isolde's final failure. They stopped at a cliff edge overlooking 2 divergent paths. One led north, the other south toward a human village visible in the distance. Marcus dismounted. The final test, sacrifice. The measure of a true leader is what they're willing to lose. He gestured north. In Blackstone Keep's dungeons, Lord Corvus lies dying. He was poisoned 3 hours ago with silver dust. Without the antidote, he will suffer for days before death. Isolde's blood turned to ice. She looked at Damien. He stood perfectly still, but she could see it now. The pallor, the tremor in his hands. You bastards, she breathed. The antidote is in the northern tower, Marcus continued. You have time to save him. He pointed south. But while you ride north, that village will burn. We've sent rogues, corrupted vampires. They'll slaughter everyone. Children, all of them. The choice was a knife between her ribs. 30 seconds, Marcus announced. Isolde looked at Damien. His gray eyes held hers. Go, he said. Save the village. Damien, 20 seconds. I'm not letting you die. You're not letting children die. He touched her cheek. You know what the right choice is. Isolde's mind raced. Then something clicked. A memory. The corrupted in the nursery, the timing, the convenience. She turned to Marcus. No, Gam. What? I said no. I refuse this test. Gasps around the circle. You refuse. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Then you fail. The marriage is void. The test is rigged, Isolde interrupted. There is no poison. There are no rogues. This is theater designed to make me choose between love and duty, but both options are lies. She walked to Damien, took his hand. Show them. Damien smiled, squeezed her hand, turned to the council. She's right. There was no poison. Lucian, if you please. Lucian appeared from the shadows holding a vial. The antidote, which is really just wine. Isolde turned to the village. And the rogues? Were never sent, Damien confirmed. The village is safe. How did you know? Marcus demanded. Because I know him, Isolde said, looking at Damien. He wouldn't endanger innocence to test me. The corrupted in the nursery was real. But this was a test to see if I could recognize manipulation. If I could see through deception. She faced the council. You wanted to know if I was worthy. Here's your answer. I'm worthy because I don't accept false choices. I'm worthy because I question authority. I'm worthy because I think. Silence. Then Victor began to clap. Slow, deliberate, magnificent. In 200 years, no one has ever called our bluff. The test wasn't whether you'd choose correctly, Marcus admitted. It was whether you'd see that the test itself was the trap. Blind obedience would have failed you. Questioning saved you. He bowed. 3 tests passed. The marriage stands. Constance screamed, "No, she's still a fraud. She's still illegitimate." "Then let's address that," Damien said coldly. "Now." They returned to the grand hall, but this time the positions had shifted. Isolde and Damien sat side by side on twin thrones. The council flanked them. Constance and Vivian stood in the center like defendants. Marcus pulled a document from his coat. "This is a letter, written by Dr. Edmund Moreland, found in his sealed office. I'll read it aloud." He unfolded the yellowed paper. "To whom it may concern, on the night of October 12th, 1803, I attended the birth of Isolde Raven. The mother, Marianne Raven, was healthy. The birth was uncomplicated. But Lady Constance Raven insisted on administering the medicine herself. She gave triple the dose of ergot. When I protested, she threatened me. Marianne Raven died of an overdose, not childbirth. I have carried this guilt for 21 years. Silence. "You murdered my mother," Isolde said. Her voice was eerily calm. "She deserved it." Constance shrieked. "She stole my husband." "And so you made her daughter pay." Isolde descended from the throne. "For 21 years you tortured a child for the crime of existing." Marcus produced another document. "This is Lord Edmund Raven's true will, hidden by Lady Constance after his death. I'll read the relevant section. I, Lord Edmund Raven, do hereby legitimize my daughter Isolde, born of Marianne Moore. She is my blood and my heir." Constance's face went white. "That's a forgery." "It's not," Lucian said, stepping forward. "I witnessed Lord Edmund sign it. 3 days before his death, Lady Constance stole it from his desk." "The letter Constance showed earlier," Damien said, "the one claiming Edmund never legitimized Isolde. That was the forgery, written in Constance's hand, witnessed by no one." Victor stepped forward. "The council finds you guilty, Lady Constance Raven. Guilty of murder, guilty of fraud, guilty of theft. Miss Vivian Raven guilty as an accomplice and co-conspirator." "What's our sentence?" Vivian whispered. Marcus's smile was terrible. "Stripped of all titles, property, wealth. The Raven estate transfers to Lady Isolde Corvus. You are exiled from all vampire territories, forbidden from using the Raven name." 2 guards stepped forward with glowing brands. "And you are branded," Victor announced. "Oathbreaker. You will carry it on your wrist. You will never hide what you are." The guards grabbed Constance, held her down. The brand touched skin. The smell of burning flesh filled the hall. Her screams echoed off stone. They branded Vivian next. She sobbed, broken and small. When it was done, Isolde looked down at them. 2 women who'd destroyed her childhood. 2 women who'd lost everything. "You're free to go," she said. "Free to find work. Free to survive on your own. No money, no name, no power." She smiled. It wasn't kind. "I survived it. Let's see if you can." They were dragged out, still crying, still begging. The doors closed. Isolde stood alone in the center of the throne room. The crown the council had brought, silver, simple, powerful, waited on a velvet cushion. Marcus lifted it. "Lady Isolde Corvus, you have proven yourself through mind, through diplomacy, through wisdom to see past deception. You have passed judgment on those who wronged you. The council recognizes you not just as Lord Corvus's wife, but as Lady Paramount of the Northern Territories." He placed the crown on her head. It was heavy. It was earned. Damien appeared beside Hero, took her hand. "The bastard they threw away," he said softly. "The queen they created." Isolde looked at him, the vampire lord who'd waited 300 years, who'd seen empires fall, who'd given her everything by first giving her the chance to prove herself. "I love you," she whispered. "I know," he replied, smiled. "You proved it when you questioned my death instead of accepting it. Love doesn't mean blind sacrifice. It means seeing clearly and choosing anyway." He kissed her, deep and slow and full of promises. The council applauded, the servants cheered, and somewhere far away in a tavern 3 towns over, a woman started her first day scrubbing floors for pennies, finally understanding what she'd destroyed. Spring had come to the Northern Territories. The cliffs were covered in wildflowers. The ocean had turned from winter gray to summer blue. Isolde stood in the lower library reviewing reports. All 7 provinces thriving. The Blackwood Thorn Bridge had created an economic boom. The Northern Pass wards were stronger than ever. She was 3 months pregnant. The baby kicked sometimes tiny flutters like butterfly wings. Damien entered without knocking. He never knocked anymore. News from the capital, he said. Vivian was arrested for theft. Constance is working as a scullery maid. Exactly what she made you do. Isolde felt nothing. They were strangers now. They're alive, she said simply. They have the chance I never had to be more than their worst moments. Damien wrapped his arms around her from behind. His hands settled over her stomach. You turned coal into diamond, he murmured. Not because someone gave you heat, because you generated it yourself. Through pressure, through survival, through refusing to break. She turned in his arms, looked up at him. To every woman told she's not enough, she whispered. You are empires. Stop asking permission to build your throne. He kissed her. Outside, the sun set over the northern territories. The vampire lord and the bastard queen watched it fall, painting their world in gold and crimson. The story of a girl who survived, who rose, who became. The girl they threw away and the queen who proved them all wrong.